Murder, especially unsolved murder, always seems to pique our interests. Whether it's our need to see justice served, or a macabre fascination with the gruesome details, most people can't help but get curious. If you happen to be one of those people who feel the attraction of such dark topics, I think you'll find what you're searching for here: Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia murderer. Elizabeth Short was born July 29th, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, and spent her early years in the Boston area, although her family did move to Portland, Maine. Eventually, they settled back in Medford, Massachusetts. After the 1929 stock market crash, her father, a miniature golf course maker, appeared to commit suicide by jumping off the Charleston Bridge, leaving his car abandoned there, although a body was never found. At the age of 15, she moved to Florida on doctor's advice during the winter months to help ease issues with bronchitis that she suffered from after surgery. She would spend the 3 winter months there, but would spend the rest of the year living with her mother and siblings in Boston. In late 1942, Short's father wrote a letter to Elizabeth's mother, apparently confessing to faking his own death and revealing that it was in fact alive and well, living just outside San Francisco, California. Elizabeth moved to join her father in December of 1942 at the age of 18, but the relationship with the man who had abandoned her and her family at age 6 broke down quickly. In January 1943, Elizabeth moved out from her father's home and began living with some friends and an apparently abusive Air Force sergeant whom she had been dating. Soon, however, she was arrested for underage drinking and was instructed to move back to Massachusetts. However, she instead decided to return to Florida, where she met Major Matthew Michael Gordon. The two fell in love and became engaged, but sadly, Matthew, a pilot in the Air Force, died August 10th, 1945 in a plane crash over India, just 1 week before the end of World War II. In July 1946, she once again relocated, this time to Los Angeles in order to visit an Army Air Force friend she'd become close to during her Florida days, who was now stationed in the Naval Reserve Air Base in Long Beach. This is where she would live out the remainder of her all too short and tragic life. On January 9th, 1947, Short returned from a romantic getaway to San Diego with a married man she'd been dating by the name of Robert Manley. Manley dropped Miss Short off at the Biltmore Hotel, located in 506 South Grand Avenue in downtown Los Angeles, where she was met by her sister, who had travelled from Boston that day to see her and to take in the town. The staff at the Biltmore recall seeing Miss Short using the lobby's telephone, and later that evening the customers at the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge at 754 South Olive Street also report seeing her at the bar. These are, however, the last time she was seen alive. Elizabeth was found dead in a vacant lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue on January 15, 1947. Her body was discovered by Betty Bessinger, a local resident, at roughly 10 a.m. while she was out walking with her 3-year-old child. Originally, Mrs. Bessinger thought that it was an abandoned mannequin, but soon realised that it was in fact the corpse of a young woman, and rushed to call the police from a nearby home. Elizabeth's body had been severely mutilated. She was cut in half at the waist, which led to her body being entirely drained of blood and her skin being almost translucent. Her face had been torn open from the corners of her mouth all the way to her ears in a grotesque smile, and had entire portions of her breast and thigh torn or cut away, with deep lacerations also left in these areas. The body was then positioned in such a way that her hands were above her head, her legs spread wide, and her exposed intestines were inserted into her buttocks. Close to the body, police found a heel print, car tire tracks, a cement bag containing watered down blood. They also found her purse and one of her shoes. However, no other clothing was found. Short was quickly identified as the victim after police took fingerprints from the corpse, and this was solidified after the autopsy, which also speculated that Miss Short passed away before midnight of the 14th, and that her body was left exposed to the elements for roughly 10 hours before being discovered. On January 21st, a call was placed to the Los Angeles Examiner, a newspaper that had spearheaded the media on this murder case, claiming to be the killer. He congratulated the paper on its coverage and admitted he intended to turn himself over to the police, but not before they pursued him a little longer. He also warned the editor of the paper to expect several more souvenirs from Beth Short. A suspicious manila envelope was found by the US Postal Service on the 24th, which was addressed to the Examiner in letters all cut and pasted in from newspaper clippings. Inside were several personal documents of Miss Short, including her birth certificate, business cards, photos, and an address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on it. On the 26th, another letter arrived, this time to the offices of the Los Angeles Examiner stating, "Here it is, turning in Wednesday, January 29th, 10 a.m. Had my fun at police, Black Dahlia Avenger." However, by the 29th, the killer had not turned himself in and instead, officers at the station received a letter that read, "Have changed my mind. You could not give me a square deal. Dahlia killing was justified." The killer continued to write letters and taunt investigators for several weeks after the crime, and even stated, "I will give up on Dahlia killings if I get 10 years. Don't try to find me." Mark Hansen, the owner of a successful nightclub and theatre in the area, was the prime suspect in the crime, due to his address book being found in the package, but also because he had a previous acquaintance with the victim. Apparently, Miss Short had rejected the sexual advances of Mr. Hansen some time prior to her tragic demise. Hansen, however, was later cleared of any wrongdoing due to a lack of any real evidence. In total, 150 men were interviewed in connection with the case, although no one was ever charged with the murder. In fact, even though there were 750 officers who had worked on the case, it was officially declared cold by the spring of 1947. Police maintain that the media frenzy that had surrounded the case was the main cause for the failure to find the killer. To this day, the killer has not been discovered, and no one has been formally charged, but there have been several people who have confessed to the murder. During the initial investigation, 60 confessions were submitted to police, but all were thought to be false, and in total, over the years, over 500 people have confessed to the brutal murder of Elizabeth Short. Mostly men, but quite a few women as well. Today, the body of Elizabeth Short lays in rest in the Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California. Elizabeth's life was filled with sad and strange complications from the onset, including being abandoned by her father, her poor health as a teenager, her troubled youth, and her constant misfortune in love. Without a doubt, the worst tragedy to befall her was that of her brutal murder. More akin to a dissection than a death. That was her worst. Doubtless now the killer has escaped the police for good, and justice for Elizabeth will never be served. What an unfortunate end to such a sad life. Although we will never know who it was who murdered poor Elizabeth Short, or how she spent her final days, I think we can all agree. It's grim, and it's ghoulish. Good night.